I was so pleased with my video on the Wiegman film that I decided to do one on the Bell film too. This film apparently is owned, the rights are owned by the Sixth Floor Museum. So maybe I'm treading on thin ice here. I hope I don't get their bustles all in a fluster about it. But apparently they own this piece of history. Basically, there's three parts to the film. The first part shows the limousine, the presidential limousine, approaching Houston Street. It's on Main Street, and then it turns the corner onto Houston Street. But this section of the film is very strange in that we only see the very top of the limo. At times it even disappears under the frame. And it's as if the photographer wasn't looking through the rangefinder. And this indeed is the official story. The photographer, we are told, is Mark Bell, and he had a Kodak Brownie 8 camera. It says in all the sources, the few sources available. This is from the Sixth Floor Museum. And here it says, Bell positioned himself at the northwest corner of Main and Houston Streets, standing on a cement peristyle that elevated him about 4 feet above the ground. From that vantage, he took approximately 15 seconds of footage of the motorcade on Main Street approaching Houston and then traveling up Houston Street towards Elm Street. During the Houston Street sequence, President and Mrs. Kennedy noticeably drop out of frame at times. This is the result of Bell holding the camera beside his face rather than looking through the viewfinder. So we are told that this is a completely innocent effect because the photographer, Mark Bell, held the camera beside his face and was not looking through the viewfinder to make sure that he was taking a picture of the subject. Now, we do have two photographs, both by Jay Skaggs, taken from across the street where Bell was, which show him in the photograph, show Bell in the photograph. In this photograph, this Skaggs photo, I have Bell circled, or the person who has been identified as Bell, circled in yellow. And here is a cropped close-up of that, of Bell standing on the, I'll call it a pedestal. There's three other people on that pedestal with him. But this kind of has to be Bell because the scene he takes, the second part of his film, shows the car as it has turned onto Elm Street. And if he were one of those other people, he would have somebody in front of him when he's photographing the second part of the film. So it kind of has to be Bell. He kind of has to be the one on the far edge here for him not to have any obstructions for his filming of the car on Elm Street. However, the sources tell us that Bell was a mail carrier for the post office. That is, he was a mailman. Typically on a working day, a mailman would be wearing a uniform, and presumably Friday midday would be in the middle of a work day, and yet this guy we are told who is Bell doesn't seem to be dressed as a mailman. In fact, we have somebody on the other side there, the guy on the left-hand side, who looks like he's dressed perhaps as a mailman. He seems to be wearing some kind of dark hat, maybe a dark blue hat, and probably some kind of a uniform, though you can't be certain that's a uniform. Now, it could be that Bell had the day off. I don't think that's part of his story. I haven't seen that anywhere. The story is about his daughter. That is the only reason he's photographing the event is his daughter wanted to see it, but he didn't want her to miss school. But, most people were working that day, and they just took a little time off to see the president come by. So I would expect, if Bell was a mailman, that he would be in mailman uniform. And the guy on the left looks like he's in mailman uniform. And the guy we are told is Bell is not wearing a mailman's uniform. So I think something funny might be going on here. And that the guy that's been identified as Bell is not really Bell, even though he is the guy who must have taken the sequence of the car on Elm Street. And that implies that there may be a different photographer who took the Bell film. And the other Skaggs photo, the first one he took when the limo was coming by, also shows Bell standing there, or the person identified as Bell, standing there in the background. And this would seem to confirm the details of the story in that the camera is not being held where you would expect someone to hold a camera, that is in front of his face. It looks like the camera is probably being held toward the lower left side of his face. You can't really see. You can't see that it's a Brownie 8, of course. It could even be a very large camera, and we just can't tell from the quality of this image. But he does seem to be holding his camera not in front of his face, which is what the story is, that he wasn't looking through the rangefinder, and that's why the film is too high on Houston Street. And in this crop from that first Skaggs photo, where we can see all four of these people there, it seems to me that every single one of them might be holding a camera at this time when the car is on Houston Street. You can't be sure that any one of them is holding a camera. You might think the guy on the left, who doesn't look like he's wearing a hat now, somehow, but you might think the guy on the left is clapping, but he could be holding a camera, not in front of his face, taking a film, and so could that next person there, and so could the next one, and so could all four of them. So I think it's possible that they all had cameras, and that they were all photographing the car turning on to Houston Street, giving the conspiracy the option to use any one of four different films, perhaps. So if, as I suspect, that this first sequence of the Bell film that shows the car on Houston Street is intentionally too high, and that the photography is conspiracy photography, why would they do that? Well, they might do that to hide what's going on the west side of Houston Street, because by having the camera held higher like this, we can't see the people on the side of the road, on the same side of the road as Bell is filming on. We can't see the backs of their heads, and I think that might be what the point is here, to hide what's going on the west side of Houston Street. For example, if the Bell film had been filmed normally, we would be able to see that James Alkins is not at the corner of Houston and Main when the limousine comes around the corner. Alkins is said to have taken these two photographs at that time, when really these were taken by Charles Brem, as we can see here in this Skaggs photo. Charles Brem has a camera in front of his face that he's just lowered after taking the fourth Alkins photo, and he's going to take one more after that as the car heads down Houston Street. So if the Bell film had been taken by a normal person, we would see Charles Brem right here and not James Alkins. And that's part of the conspiracy plan, is to pretend that Alkins was there so that we don't figure out that he was in position to take his Alkins 6 photo before the president came by, in order to give Billy Lovelady an alibi by pasting the photo of him he took at that time into a photo he took when the president came by. To do this, Alkins has to stand in the same place when he takes the picture of Lovelady as he's standing in when he takes the picture of the president coming by. So Charles Brem stands in for him on Houston Street, and if the Bell film had been taken by a normal person, we would see Charles Brem, and not James Alkins, standing there photographing the president at the corner. And so they have the Bell film too high for us to be able to see that. And also there's this police officer here they wouldn't want us to see in the Bell film, that we can see in the Skaggs photo, who was not assigned to this position. You can tell because he's wearing the dark hat, which is a patrolman's hat, and no patrolmen were No radio patrolmen were assigned to this position. There were some other police officers from the traffic division who wear the white hats who were assigned to this position. But this guy wasn't. He was never officially identified. And if we saw him in the Bell film, if we saw a police officer standing there in the Bell film, we might be curious as to who he is, and we might find out that he's R.C. Nelson, and we might look into R.C. Nelson and find out that he played the role of Tippett in Oak Cliff, pretending to be shot in Oak Cliff instead of J.D. Tippett. So this is an important player in the conspiracy action, and so they would have a good reason to not want us to notice him being there. And so that's another reason that the Bell film might have been taken too high, so we wouldn't see Officer Nelson there, who was standing, of course, right next to Charles Brem. But there are some things we can see in the Bell film which are helpful. And I've stopped the film on this frame here because it corresponds approximately to the same time that the Alkins 4 photo was taken. The Alkins 4 photo taken by Charles Brem, of course. And my version of the Alkins 4 photo has been pieced together. I pieced it together because you can't find this photograph in full frame anywhere. For some reason, the shills and idiots don't like to show this as a full picture. And I surmise the reason is because we can see this man standing on the side of the road, who is a CIA agent by the name of Rip Robertson, seems to be exchanging signals with Jackie Kennedy, the First Lady. And that's something that you would naturally draw your eyes to if you saw this photo together. Usually it's shown with either the left side or the right side, but it's never shown together except by me. I've never seen anyone else put this photo together, even though the Shills and Idiots devote hours and years to the assassination and put photos together. They colorize old photos, but they never put this photo together. And James Alkins, who wasn't even there at the time, tells a story about the wind suddenly picking up and Jackie putting her hand up to her head. That is to explain why she has her hand up to her head in his photo taken by Charles Brem. But as we can see in the Bell film, Jackie has her hand up on her hat long before they turn the corner. You can see as she's approaching the corner, her hand is on her hat. The Bell film shows us this. And it's hard to see, but the Bell film does show, even while Jackie keeps her hand up to her hat, maybe she doesn't see Rip Robertson there by the side of the road. Robertson saw her with her hand on her hat, and he brings his hand down before the car finishes passing by. So this story that Alkins told about Jackie putting her hand up to her hat because it was windy is proven bullshit. He lied. He was unprompted. He was not asked about this. He just made sure that he was going to tell the Warren Commission this to get it on the record, that Jackie wasn't exchanging signals with Rip Robertson. The wind just almost blew her hat off. Well, the Bell film proves that that's a lie, that she had her hand on her hat all the way around the corner as she approached the corner. She didn't put it up just as he took the picture, as he said she did. This Bronson photo might show this even a little better. We can see that both Jackie and Robertson, who's off on the left, Jackie on the right here. Before the car is turning the corner, we can see Jackie has her hand up to her hat already. And whoever took the Alkins 4 photo, I say that was Charles Brem, of course, not Alkins, but whoever took it was standing in a spot that's hidden by the bus there on the left. So Jackie has her hand on her hat long before the photographer of the Alkins 4 photo is about to snap his picture, and that proves that Alkins was lying. And going back to the comparison of this frame of the Bell film with the Alkins 4 photo, to the left there, I and other people have noticed this, of course. I wasn't the first to notice that person there looks just like Rip Robertson of the CIA. And I say that is Robertson. I've never seen anyone identify the guy next to him as Shackley, but I think that's Ted Shackley, both of them of the CIA. And as far as I know, this is the only evidence there is which directly connects CIA personnel to the assassination. So I think that's very important. Of course, that's from the Alcon 6 photo, but we can see them also in the Bell film. And then in the center of the photo, we have Jim Featherston. This is not a disputed identification. Everybody says that's Jim Featherston. He's the guy who grabbed Marianne Moorman's photo and enabled a switch to be made, I believe, between Moorman's photo and the Babushka lady's photo. And over on the right, we have a police officer who was assigned to this intersection. That's Officer Denham. And he wears the white hat, which designates him as being in the traffic division. And then here in this frame of the Bell film, we can see Jay Skaggs as he's about to take the first of his two photos, the two photos I showed earlier. And unlike Mark Bell, Jay Skaggs holds his camera in front of his face so that he can see what he's taking a picture of. Who let this guy into Dealey Plaza? And one of these two guys here is Jerry Coley, the person who saw the puddle of blood behind the Black Dogman wall where J.D. Tippit was actually shot. He and his friend were standing up on the pole there. And I have seen this person identified as Garland Slack. I can't confirm that identification, but I point him out here because later on in the video I'm going to mention Garland Slack as a witness to a young black boy being located by an Officer H.B. Randall. So, there he is, apparently. And then a little further down Houston Street, we see Barbara and Arnold Rowland. Arnold Rowland was a conspiracy-controlled witness for the murderers. Arnold was only 19 years old at the time, but he had a criminal record, passing bad checks, and probably also theft. And I presume that the authorities were able to use him because of his criminal record. They were able to have leverage over him if he wanted to stay out of prison or whatever. That's what I assume. To judge by the documents initially, he was used to establish that there was a shooter with a rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. He said this shooter was in a different window than they blamed Oswald for being in, but he saw this guy 10 to 20 minutes before the president came by, so there's plenty of time for him to get into the right window. So I think that was his initial purpose. But by the time of his Warren Commission testimony, he added to his story that there was an elderly black man in the sniper's nest window. And that's something that he never said prior to his Warren Commission testimony, even though he claimed he had told somebody that. It's not on the record until his Warren Commission testimony. And the testimony by Rowland about the elderly Negro was used in addition to a newspaper article that was planted by the Secret Service to coerce Eddie Piper, a Texas School Book Depository employee who happened to be an elderly Negro. It was used to coerce him into lying about Vicki Adams coming down the stairway. And I don't think I'll explain every element of that in this video, but I think it's nice that we see Barbara and Arnold Rowland here in the Bell film. He's visible in other photography too, but it's one of the things we can see in the Bell film. And the second part of the Bell film is this short sequence we can see of the car traveling on Elm Street. And apparently Bell started looking through his rangefinder again after the sequence on Houston Street. That is, if the same person actually took the film, the same person who took the film on Houston Street also took the rest of the film. Apparently for the rest of the film, he started looking through the camera like you're supposed to do. And here in the second part of the Bell film, we can see this person here standing on the pedestal.
I was on the corner of Elm and Houston, and I was up on a pedestal.
Yeah, sure you were. As I have explained many times, too many times already, this person wasn't really standing on the pedestal. This was inserted into the films to make it look as though she was standing on the pedestal, because a black boy, the one we call Amos Ewins, was standing on that pedestal, and they had to hide the fact that there were two black boys. And we could see on the pedestal on the left, there's a black boy sitting on that one. That's, I believe, the 11-year-old black boy, whereas the 15-year-old black boy was on the pedestal that Tony Glover said she was on. I don't think I'll go through all that here. In my last video, I gave a better explanation of that, if you're interested. And then there's this person here on the other side of the street, and if you follow his motion, he moves as if he is throwing something at the car as it passes in front of him. And here I'm still running it slowly at 50% speed, because if I run it at 100% speed, it's just too jerky to follow. So this guy threw something at the president's car. And this frame from the Dorman film, showing the opposite side of the street from where the throwing man is, shows an object has moved during the exposure of this frame in such a way that it appears to have bounced off a car behind the president's limousine onto the sidewalk here. So I think this must be the object that the throwing man threw. And while I've got the Dorman folder open, I think I'll show you this. This is something Dale Myers put together, where he used frames from the Dorman film. And I just wanted to show this here because I've been talking about Tony Glover in this video and the last one. And notice that the Dorman film moves all around, but it doesn't move. It doesn't show the pedestal. It moves all around the pedestal. Tony Glover, according to the official story, is standing on the pedestal. I say she's standing on the grass. And coincidentally, the Dorman film, which films this area, just skirts all around the pedestal so that you can't tell for sure where Tony Glover is standing, coincidentally. And getting back to the topic of the throwing man here, we can see here in the Towner film that Kennedy, there's a few frames missing during the throw probably, but Kennedy afterwards seems to be getting up after ducking. So I think this shows, all of the stuff I've shown here shows that this throwing man threw something at the president or at the car, that Kennedy saw that and ducked to avoid being hit, thinking that it was being thrown at him. Probably it wasn't being thrown directly at him. Probably it was being thrown at the car just to get his attention, I think. This is a zoom and crop from a clearer capture of this frame of the Bell film. And here I have circled in red the throwing man, and beside him, a person I've circled in green, there is a man who has a camera up in front of his face. So I surmise that the throwing man is throwing something to get President Kennedy's attention and to perhaps put a frightened look onto his face so that the man circled in green can take a picture of the president at that moment, just before he is murdered. And though you can't see him in the Bell film, you can see in the Towner film here, a frame from the Towner film, that there is a police officer standing in front of these two people. And there was no report made about any incident of anybody throwing anything at the president. So I conclude from that this police officer was there to protect these people, that is, the man throwing something, and the man photographing the president. The police officer is there for them. And here I have added a blue circle, which encloses two men and a car, an automobile. And man number 2, you can see, if you use your imagination a little bit, that he is standing behind a slightly opened car door with his hand on top of the car door. So the car door is open with this man holding it, and man number 1, I surmise, is also with the throwing man and the man with the camera. And they are there with a car and a police officer looking after them. And going back to the Bell film here, I have circled Howard Brennan, the construction worker who sat on the wall. So here we have Howard Brennan sitting on the wall, having a good view of the car across the street, the policeman there, and these other people I've pointed out. And Howard Brennan later wrote a book in which he said this: "While surveying the area, I glanced away to the side of the depository building and found something I could not understand. At that time, there was a side entrance towards the rear of the building on Houston Street. At some point during the morning hours, the police had sealed off parking in that block and forced all cars to move. Sawhorses were placed at Elm and Houston to block traffic. As I looked around, I saw a lone car parked beside the book depository with a male seated behind the wheel. The car was an Oldsmobile, a 1955 to 1957 model. It is difficult to tell the exact year unless one is an expert, because all those years looked nearly alike. I remember wondering why all the other cars had been made to move and this one had not. I didn't have the chance to study the driver carefully, but he was wearing civilian clothes and appeared to be middle-aged. One thing that interested me about the car was the way it was parked. The left front wheel was pulled sharply away from the curb, and the driver had the door partially open. Later I wondered if the reason for this was so the car could make a quick U-turn in a speedy departure. As I was watching the man in the car, I saw a policeman who was on foot walk over towards the car and begin talking to the man in a friendly, laughing manner. So far as I could see, there was no attempt made to get the man to move his car, and after chatting for a minute or so, the policeman walked back to his post. It was this fact that made me think the police should have made some report about the presence of the car, but I have never seen any other account of this mystery car. So I conclude from the photography and Howard Brennan's account that this police officer was there to see to the needs of these people who came in that car, that is, to protect them, and that they are there to throw something at the president so that they can take a photograph of him with a funny look on his face just before he is murdered. That's the kind of conspiracy this was, an inside job. And for various reasons, which I won't go through in this video because I've covered them in other videos, I think the fat guy there is Clint Murchison. He was a rich Dallas person. I think the photographer is George Herbert Walker Bush, later to become President of the United States, who was involved with the CIA at the time of the assassination. And I think the throwing man is a person by the name of Jules Pfeiffer or something like that. I've never seen his name written out, but I heard somebody say that name. He's the chauffeur of Clint Murchison, or Clint Murchison's ex-wife, I believe it is, actually.
I worked with a man called Jules Pfeiffer, black man, which was Virginia Murchison's chauffeur.
Anyway, that's who I think they are. And also in the second part of the Bell film, we can see Danny Arce, standing behind Cowboy Man. I talked about him in my Wiegman video, my Wiegman film video, and I'm not going to go through all that here, but we can also see where Danny Arce is actually standing here in the Bell film. And here I've circled the area behind where Danny Arce is standing in front of the building there, just to show that nobody's there. And that's relevant because James Worrell told the Warren Commission that that's where he was. He even marked an X on a photograph in front of the building as to where he supposedly was standing at the time of the shooting. And we can see in the Bell film that there's nobody there where he marked his X. So I think it's a good bet that Richard Worrell was lying. And I've concluded that Worrell was a conspiracy-controlled witness. His original purpose, I surmise, was to identify or partially identify Oswald leaving the building after the assassination. But they decided to abandon him for some reason. The conspiracy, decided to abandon him as a witness, and he ended up telling a ridiculous story of how he was at Love Field when the president arrived there, and how he was in Dilley Plaza when the president was shot, and he was traveling by bus. And it's pretty much impossible, the story he tells the Warren Commission. And we are told that he died in a motorcycle accident in 1966. I don't believe that. I think this is probably a fake death sort of thing. They probably wanted to take him off the researcher market so nobody could talk to him. Obviously, he's a pretty bad liar, and he was employed by the conspiracy. So I don't think they wanted researchers talking to him, and they arranged for him to supposedly die in a motorcycle accident in 1966. And the last thing I'll cover for this part of the film is this black boy here sitting on this pedestal. I guess I have to explain more of this issue just to sensibly relate the Bell film to the matter. According to the official story, there was a black boy witness, a 15-year-old black boy witness by the name of Amos Ewens. And here, Forrest Sorrells, the Secret Service agent in charge in Dallas at the time, tells the Warren Commission that he believes the name was Ewens. Ewens, I believe it is, or pretty close to that. Well, I surmise the reason he says, or pretty close to that, is because the boy's name was not actually Ewens, that the name Amos Ewens was a created identity for this event, so that there would be only one black boy witness, a 15-year-old named Amos Ewens. But actually, there were two little colored boy witnesses. As Forrest Sorrells himself says, talking again to the Warren Commission, the little colored boy mentioned he was there with another colored boy that ran off when this thing happened. At the first shot, this boy ran off. He said he stayed there, but the other boy ran off. I didn't make any effort to get in touch with him because he apparently saw nothing. So Forrest Sorrells himself tells us there was another witness, another little black boy, whom he made no effort to talk to. Another witness to the murder of the president that the Secret Service agent in charge made no effort to talk to. So there were two black boy witnesses who were together at this event. And early on, there was a radio report from KRLD about a small black boy witness, about an 11-year-old black boy.
And then the police officers found an 11-year-old colored boy named Eunice, that was his last name, who said that he looked up after the first shot and saw a colored man lean out of about the fourth floor window of the Texas School Book Depository building and fire two more shots.
So we've got an 11-year-old black boy who saw a black man shooting from the Texas School Book Depository, and that's the witness that Forrest Sorrells made no effort to talk to. The one who saw somebody shooting from the building, or a black man shooting from the building, he talked to a 15-year-old black boy who saw somebody in a different window with something. He couldn't, with a gun apparently, shooting. But they ignored the 11-year-old that we hear the radio report about. So there were two black boys here. Forrest Sorrells said there were two black boys here. In the radio report, his name is said to be Eunice. Forrest Sorrells says it's Ewins or something like that, or something close to that. So I think his name was not Eunice and it wasn't Ewins, that it was some other name, that an unusual name that sounds a bit like both of those. So I looked in the Dallas phone book looking for Ewins. There was no Ewins in there. There was no Eunice. The only thing that was something like them was Ewoons, which is a very strange name. And I wouldn't be surprised if the reporter misheard that name and thought it was Eunice. Booker J. Ewoons. And I presume that Booker J. is the father of the two black boys. And being such an unusual name, it was easy to find them in this ancestry site database. There were two Ewoons boys at the time. One would have been about 11 years old, the one that was interviewed on the radio, and one was 15 years old, the one who became the official story witness, and they changed his name from Ewoons to Ewins in order to hide the fact that he had an 11-year-old brother, that somebody would be more easily able to figure this out. And so they created the witness Amos Ewins with the 15-year-old Leonard Ewoons. So getting back to the Bell film here, we've got two pedestals, two black boys, they're brothers, they're together, and there's one on each pedestal is what I conclude from all of this and from stuff I haven't got to yet. But so in the Bell film, we can see what I surmise to be the 11-year-old, and the 15-year-old who was standing on the other pedestal has been covered up by putting Tony Glover and her mother on that pedestal. And I think there's good reason to believe that based upon the photography. And going back to what Forrest Sorrells said to the Warren Commission, he said that the other boy ran off. Implication being that the 15-year-old did not run off. So Forrest Sorrells, I think, is basing his story on true events, even though he's lying. But he says one ran off and one didn't. And this one I have circled in the Bell film, he's the one that ran off. And we can see in the photography that he ran off, because here he is later on in the Bell film. He's down the street now, in the area where JFK had been shot. He obviously ran off down here, and we can see him pointing, presumably, to the Texas School Book Depository window where he saw the black man shooting from. And after that, we can see him here in the parking lot behind the grassy knoll. And this just happens to be where Sergeant Harkness found the black boy witness. So I say that the 11-year-old is the black boy that Sergeant Harkness picked up in the parking lot and brought to the front of the building. Even though we are told that that's Amos Ewins, I think this was the 11-year-old black boy here. So the 11-year-old is the one I have circled here. Why should we believe that he's not the 15-year-old Amos Ewins? Well, for one thing, Ewins told the Warren Commission that he was at the location marked by the A here, which is right by the pedestal where Tony Glover stands in the Bell film. So he's not identifying himself as being on the 11-year-old's pedestal. He's identifying himself as being next to the other pedestal. I think he was actually on top of the pedestal, but he is telling the Warren Commission that he was near that pedestal, and when shots are fired, he hid behind that pedestal. And we can see here in this frame from the Darnell film that there is somebody hiding behind that pedestal. I think that's probably the 15-year-old Amos Ewens, as we call him. I think he did hide behind the pedestal. Now, it looks like there's another person there with him, and it could very well be that the 11-year-old got off of his pedestal and came over here to be with his brother, and perhaps at this moment they're both hiding behind that pedestal. After this, one of them ran down the street. I say the 11-year-old did. But the other one, I think, stayed here. Now, Amos Ewens, the 15-year-old, did say that he ran down the street, or he ran to the parking lot, is what he said. But I think the 15-year-old, the one we now call Amos Ewens, stayed hiding behind that pedestal and was found by a police officer there. And the reason I think that is because Garland Slack apparently told the FBI that police officer H.B. Randall picked up a frightened young colored boy who was hiding under a monument, which boy was supposed to have actually witnessed the shooting of the president. Now, there is no Officer Randall. I think this is Officer H.B. McLean. But let's not get into that here. So, a police officer, according to Garland Slack, found a black boy witness hiding under a monument. Well, I think what he must mean is this thing that I'm calling the pedestal. That's where this other police officer found the black boy witness, even though we have Sergeant Harkness finding the black boy in the parking lot. So we've got two different black boys here. One ran off, and that's the one Sergeant Harkness found. And another one hid under the monument, and that's the one H.B. Randall found. But the conspirators, presumably Forrest Sorrells himself here, has conflated these two into one, and he's made the one that was found by H.B. Randall into the Amos Ewens witness, and also the one found by Harkness has been made into the Amos Ewens witness. So I say there were two black boy witnesses. One was an 11-year-old who's on the left-hand side pedestal here. He saw a black man shooting from the building. The conspiracy wanted to hide that, so they conflated these two into one witness, the 15-year-old, whom I say was this 11-year-old's brother, who was standing on the right pedestal there, where they put Tony Glover to hide the fact that the black boy was there. So and now they also, I think, want to hide the fact that the one I have circled here is one of these black boys, because they've got the other one saying he was by the other pedestal, where he really was. So they can't have this boy on the other pedestal be either one of these guys, because they want us to forget that the 11-year-old exists, and they say the 15-year-old was standing by the other one. So I think this person in the Bell film, the one on the left here I have circled, that alterations were made to this person in the Bell film. And I think if you compare him to the 11-year-old Amos Ewens found by Harkness, or the 11-year-old black boy found by Harkness, they look kind of different. The one that's sitting in the Bell film on the left looks like a big fat person, whereas the one that Harkness found in the parking lot looks like a relatively slim, small person. So I think the Bell film was altered to make this guy look like a fatso, so that he couldn't be the little 11-year-old colored boy. But this person also happens to appear in the Martin film, and in the Martin film, he doesn't look like a big fat guy. He looks like a little 11-year-old colored boy. And if we compare the two films, as this person appears, the one in the Bell film looks very motionless, while the one in the Martin film is clapping, obviously. And so I think, and if you're faking somebody in a film, it's much easier to fake him as a still figure than it is to put him into motion. So I think they did a little fix here on the Bell film. They made him fat and stopped him clapping, and they didn't bother altering the Martin film in regards to this person here. So I think the Martin film reveals that the Bell film has been altered here, and they're doing it to hide the fact that there was an 11-year-old black boy witness who saw a black man shooting from the Texas School Book Depository, because they want to blame Oswald for doing that. And there really was a black man shooting from the 5th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. But I don't see the need to get into the details of that here. This is about the Bell film, and I say the Bell film was altered with regards to this person on the pedestal here. And the third part of the Bell film, the last part of the Bell film, shows the scene on Elm Street after the shooting. The story is that Bell jumped down from the pedestal and ran a bit over to the lawn and started filming as the limousine was going under the overpass. And this is the very first frame of the sequence of the third part of the film. And it shows this person here, and this is the only place we can see him here. It looks like he's kind of invisible and you can see the cars through him, but that's just because of the cars moving and where the light, what's the brightest things here, and the camera in motion too, probably. So he's really there. And I think it's Charles Brem. And in this later frame from the Bell film, we can see Charles Brem in the same area holding the hand of his son Joey. So it makes sense that this is Charles Brem, because he's in the same area where we can see him afterwards with his son. But in this first frame of the film, we don't see Charles Brem with his son. We just see him. We can't tell whether his son might be there or not. But we can see another little boy to the left here with some other man. But we can't see that other man in the later frame of the film where we can see Charles Brem with his son. That is, we never see any frame of the film where Charles Brem is with his son and this other man is with the other boy. And I think the other boy with the other man is actually Charles Brem's son. And that's the same boy we see with Charles Brem later on in the film. So this is consistent with my theory that Charles Brem stood in for James Elkins on Houston Street. And then after he took the last Elkins photo on Houston Street, he ran over here to Elm Street to be with his son again, and his son was being tended by this other man here. And then Joey left the custody of the other man and went to be with his father, which is why we can see them together in a later frame of the Bell film. And we can see that this man who's with the little boy, if we run the film here, and we can see this man here, he doesn't have the little boy anymore, and that's because he has handed him off to Charles Brem. And I've put these two frames of the Bell film together just to demonstrate that this is the same guy. There's nobody else there that can be. Now, the guy off on the left in the bottom picture there is the same guy that's standing next to this guy with the little boy in the top picture. And there's nobody else there it could be. So the man who had the little boy no longer has the little boy a few seconds later, and that means that he has handed him off to the other man that was there, who I say was Charles Brem. Now, I can imagine that the shills and idiots will lose their shit over this, because they will object and say that we can see Brem and his son in the Zapruder film when the president comes by. And we can see them there, but as I have explained before, and in my last film, or my last video regarding the Wiegman film, and Apron Man. The film in the background of the Zapruder film for the middle section of the film was film that had been taken separately from the assassination sequence. It had been taken earlier when one of the advance cars went by. Actually, I think it's a little more complex than that. I think film was taken before the president came by, and it was used in conjunction with the actual background. And that's a technical thing that I wouldn't be able to do, but I'm sure even in 1963, skilled technicians could do this. And so the background we see in the Zapruder film is not the actual background of the assassination. And it was done this way in order to have so they could edit the Zapruder film without the background having to be edited too. They just put a different background in. They put a background that they filmed about 5 minutes before the president came by. And this allowed them to edit the background separately from the foreground being the limousine action. So they were able to remove frames from the limousine action without it showing up in the background. This allows for a continuous motion. So even though the limousine did actually stop, as many witnesses said it did, it doesn't show up in the film because the background keeps moving along because it's based upon a background that was taken before the car came by. And they filmed Charles Bremen and his son there at that time. But at the time of the assassination, Charles Bremen and his son were not there. And this transition back to the completely genuine background, I think, occurred about here, just before we could see Charles Bremen come into the frame, along with Richard Bothan and James Alkins. So I think at this point we have returned to a completely genuine background. If I'm correct, and of course I think I'm correct, that would also mean that they would have to have inserted photographically Charles Bremen and his son into the Muchmore film and into the Bronson photography. And I think that was certainly within the capabilities of this conspiracy. I first recognized Charles Bremen being here when I saw this frame of the Bell film, but he is in two other films. I now see him there, even though I never realized it was Charles Bremen before. One of these other films is the next film, and if I even noticed this guy, I just assumed he was some random person who happened to be there and was never identified. But now I think it's Charles Bremen. And the other film this person is in is the Zapruder film. I never would have recognized that as Charles Bremen. He looks thinner to me than Charles Bremen. But now I am convinced that that is Charles Bremen. So I'm saying that Charles Bremen appears twice in the Zapruder film, that these are both the same person. I can understand why some people might disagree just looking at these two. In fact, I probably would have disagreed if I didn't have all the other context I have now. I probably wouldn't have thought these were the same person. Charles Bremen in the first, or in the middle here, who's earlier in the film, looks fatter than the other guy. It looks like he's wearing a lighter colored top jacket than the other guy. But we have different camera angles, we have different sun angles, and I think it's, same person can look different in different photography under different conditions. Anyway, I think they're both Charles Bremen. And I'm saying that Joey Bremen appears twice in the Zapruder film. In the earlier version, with Charles, his father, he has his jacket buttoned up, and in the later appearance with the other man, he has obviously a red shirt on under his jacket. His jacket is no longer buttoned up or zipped up, whatever. So I think they had Joey Bremen have his jacket open when he's standing with the other man and closed when he's standing with his father, just so we would think it's a different boy. But you can see he's wearing the same color jacket, same color pants, And he certainly could be the same boy, as I say he is. Now, this man who looks after Joey while Charles Brem is on Houston Street has been identified as a Jack Franzen. The official story is that Jack Franzen was there with his wife and son. Now, I think we're supposed to take that as his wife to his left in the Zapruder film. However, if we look at the Bell film, it doesn't look like she's with him, though you can't be sure. And as I say, the boy is actually Joey Brem, not his son. So I think Jack Franzen was a tool of the conspiracy. So just to review this Brem thing, I say Brem was standing in for Alkins on Houston Street so that Alkins could be standing in position to fake his Alkins 6 photo to give Billy Lovelady an alibi. And while Brem was over on Houston Street, his son was with Jack Franzen on Elm Street. And then after doing the photography on Houston Street, Brem ran back over to Elm Street, and he ran over towards where Franzen was with his son so he could get his son back. And then they sat down here, as we can see in this Bond photograph, and that they weren't really there during the time of the assassination, even though we can see them there in the Zapruder film. And it's this frame of the Bell film which allows me to put it all together. And continuing with the film here, we see the limousine going under the overpass. And we can see this white dot in the shadows under the overpass. And if we zoom it and do a little enhancement, we see this. And I surmise that that white dot is the helmet of a motorcycle officer by the name of James Cheney. And I've explained this very well very many times, so I'll just say here that Cheney is under there waiting for the limousine to come by because Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service agent in the passenger seat in the front of the car, is going to hand out the gun that William Greer had used to Officer Cheney. And it was the Bell film that was key to allowing me to understand why Officer Cheney was there. We'll get back to Officer Cheney later in the film, but now running it up to the Pergola area here, where we can see Alan Tippett and his friend off on the right there. Alan Tippett, I surmise, has just received Mrs. Chisholm's smaller handbag, and he's taking it up behind the bench where he was going to put it in Beatrice Hester's shopping bag. And we can see Beatrice Hester off on the left there on the ground with her shopping bag in front of her. She's supposed to be by the bench when Alan Tippett comes by to put the handbag in there, but she's not there, so he keeps hold of that. And I also have Dave Wiegman circled here. In my video on the Wiegman film, I mentioned that he got down on the ground, as we could see in other photography. Well, this is the other photography. That's Dave Wiegman on the ground just after he had photographed the Hesters up by the pergola. Well, I have to back up and run the film again here because I blew right by the mental case. There's so much in the Bell film, you just miss so much so easily. This mental case, as I call him, as I have identified him, can be seen running in the Bell film, running away from the area of the overpass, running west on the lawn. This person can also be seen running in the Pascal film, which is perhaps the shittiest of all the assassination films we have. And we can see in the Pascal film that there are two people running towards him as he is running west. And going back to the Bell film, you can see these same two people over on the right-hand side of the screen also running toward the man I call the mental case. And this same scene can also be viewed in the Jack Daniel film, taken from the other side of the overpass. Here, those two people running towards the other man are on the left, and the running man, the mental case, is on the right. And here in the Daniel film, I'm running it in very slow motion. The man with the woman with him running from Elm Street towards the mental case, they seem to confront him, and the mental case stops running. And at one time, I came to the conclusion that the man that ran over to the mental case actually struck the mental case, that is, hit him, and he fell down. Though I can't see that now, but it does look like the mental case stops running, and these two people that were running towards him confront him, and this is immediately following the assassination. So I view this as suspicious behavior. That is, we have the mental case running away from the overpass, and these other two people running over to the mental case and seem to be behaving as if they feel they've been betrayed by this guy, like he lied to them about what was going to happen if they realized that the president had been murdered. Of course, that's just conjecture, but it makes me suspicious of this guy. And now I'll direct your attention to the three tramps, particularly the one in the middle, the one that some people have identified as Charles Harrelson, the father of Woody Harrelson, and whom the official storytellers eventually identified as a Harold Doyle. And I bring up the tall tramp here because when we compare him to the person running in the Bell film, the mental case, they seem to be dressed the same way. They both are wearing a dark coat or a black coat. In the Bell film, where he's running, that coat is buttoned up, so we can't see that he's wearing a light shirt underneath, though it does look like you can see a little bit of the collar there is light underneath the collar of the coat. The pants seem to be the same color, at least relative to the coat. And in both, it looks like he's wearing dark shoes or black shoes. So I think the running man looks an awful lot like the tall tramp, and probably is the tall tramp, even if I can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And now I want to go to this FBI report of an interview with assassination witness John Dolan. It says here, Dolan advised he is employed at the Sportatorium, Industrial Boulevard, and Cadiz, Dallas, Texas. According to Mr. Dolan, he was stopped at the eastern edge of the Triple Viaduct, where the three streets of Commerce, Main, and Elm merge on November 22nd, 1963. The reason being traffic was held up at this point since the presidential motorcade was approaching this section of Dallas. Inasmuch as all traffic was stopped, he got out of his car and stood at the base of the Triple Viaduct, facing toward the concrete memorial, which is on the north side of Elm Street and just west of the Texas School Book Depository. And looking at this photograph of the assassination scene just after it happened, I conclude that that must be John Dolan, circled in blue in the middle of the photograph, as he is stopped on Commerce Street and right where he said he was. And in this frame of the Zapruder film, we can see Dolan, once again circled in blue on the right there, as the mental case is running from the overpass area west on the lawn, circled in red. So we can see that Dolan would have had a good opportunity to view this person, the mental case. And going back to the FBI report of the interview with John Dolan, As he was standing at this point, and prior to the arrival of the presidential motorcade, he noticed an unknown white male tossing a white ball about the size of a softball in the air. This person would throw the ball up and seem to catch it himself, and it caught his eye inasmuch as this person appeared to be about 30 years of age and was wearing white sneakers. He further described this individual as being about 6 feet tall, with black curly hair, wearing dark-colored jacket and nondescriptive pants. He also doubted if he would ever recognize this individual were he to see him again. Shortly after he noticed this individual, the presidential motorcade came into view, and from where he stood he could hear 3 shots fired at the president's car. He advised he did not see where these shots came from, nor who fired these shots, but thought possibly the individual whom he has described, and who was standing on the grass triangle between Elm and Main Streets, might possibly have either been a decoy or a signal for the assassin when to shoot. He concluded by saying he had no particular reason for this thought, but merely wished to volunteer this information to the FBI. While we can see another man to the left of the mental case in this frame of the Zapruder film, it seems like the mental case is most likely the person that Dolan is talking about, even though, of course, we don't have a film of him throwing a ball up in the air. But it possibly could be that other person there. But it seems likely to me that the running mental case must be the person that Dolan is talking about. And according to the FBI report, Dolan said the man was about 30 years old, wearing white sneakers, about 6 feet tall, and wearing a dark jacket. And if we compare Dolan's description to the photography of the mental case and the tramp, everything looks right except for the white sneakers. And it just so happens that this woman, who is one of the 2 people who run towards the mental case, happens to be wearing apparently white sneakers or white shoes or some kind of white footwear there. So I think probably Dolan has conflated the footwear of this woman with the footwear of the mental case. This kind of conflation of details has happened in the case of the assassination with other witnesses. For example, Robert Jackson conflated the Newmans with the Chisholms, the Newmans being a white family with a child. They had 2 children with them, and the Chisholms being a black family with a child. He described both families as if they were the same family. So this is something that happens, witness conflation. Details can be transferred from one person to another, and I think that's what happened here with Dolan. So I think Dolan was talking about this person here, and that Dolan thought him to be a suspicious character. And now I'll use this FBI document to introduce Malcolm J. Hoy to the story. This is an FBI report of an interview with Aubrey Ray Lindsay. Lindsay stated he formerly operated his own shop, the Taylor Motor Company. He said while operating this business, Malcolm J. Hoy was a customer of his. Lindsay advised that on November 22, 1963, he had Hoy's car in his shop for repairs. He stated Hoy stopped by the shop and asked him if one of Lindsay's employees would drive him to downtown Dallas so he could view the presidential motorcade. Lindsay stated he let one of his employees drive Hoy to downtown Dallas. Lindsay stated he cannot now recall which of his employees drove Hoy to downtown Dallas. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation apparently did not try to discover which one of his employees did this, even though I'm sure they could have if they had wanted to. Lindsay advised that shortly before Hoy returned to Lindsay's repair shop, he had heard radio broadcasts announcing that President Kennedy had been shot. Lindsay stated when Hoy returned, he commented to him that President Kennedy was shot twice because I was there watching it. That's what Hoy said. At this time, Lindsay stated the radio broadcast had only stated that President Kennedy had been shot. Lindsay stated he has not seen Hoy for a number of months and believes he last resided at 4310 San Jacinto, Dallas, Texas. He said he attempted to locate Hoy at this address and was informed by the landlady that Hoy was a very strange individual. She said the walls and furniture in his room were filled with bullet holes, and she asked Hoy to move, which he did. Lindsay said he does not know Hoy's present whereabouts, but believes he was employed on the assembly line by General Motors at the Arlington, Texas plant. So apparently there are two elements here which made Lindsay suspicious of Hoy. One was that he apparently knew information about the shooting, that is, that Kennedy had been shot twice, which had not been made known publicly. On the radio, Lindsay heard that the Kennedy had been shot, but not shot twice. And the other element of suspicion here is apparently Hoy likes to shoot his gun off inside his room where he lives. So apparently Lindsay thought that these two elements of the Hoy story meant that he should call the FBI and tell them about it. And shortly after talking to Lindsay, the FBI did go to the General Motors plant and talk to somebody there. Theodore H. Freeman, Chief Plant Protection, General Motors Corporation, Arlington, Texas, was interviewed in his office. Freeman advised the records of this General Motors plant indicate Malcolm Jerry Hoy was employed on June 4th, 1963 as a spot welder, and his employment was terminated on May 4th, 1964, when he walked off the job without notice. According to Hoy's personnel file, an employment inquiry was received on May 28, 1964, from General Motors plant at Southgate, California, asking for employment recommendations on Hoy, as he had apparently applied for work at that General Motors plant. The local employment office on the same day gave unfavorable recommendation on Hoy to the Southgate plant. Freeman advised the file does not indicate that Hoy was ever hired by the Southgate General Motors plant, but he cannot say for sure that he was not hired. Freeman noted the local personnel file of Hoy contains a notation by some unidentified General Motors interviewer that he thought Hoy was a mental case. Freeman continued noting that Hoy apparently arrived in Dallas, Texas around June 1963 from 8577 Tidewater Drive, Norfolk, Virginia, which address is also noted on Hoy's application as that of his father, William Thomas Hoy. Hoy's personnel file contains the following local Dallas addresses during his period of residence in the city. I won't go through them, but I'll note that the address, which Lindsay had said that he had put bullet holes into the furniture in his room, is not one of these addresses. Freeman noted that at the time Hoy quit, a representative went to his last known address of 4840 Junius Avenue, Dallas, where Hoy's former landlady advised that he had left Dallas, advising her General Motors was sending him to a mechanics school in Detroit, Michigan. Freeman noted this remark by Hoy about being sent by General Motors to a school in Michigan was untrue. Freeman noted Hoy was apparently hired at the time General Motors was setting up a second shift and was taking almost anyone they could get, and accordingly was not doing as much of a screening job as they normally would do in their hiring. And then there's some information on Hoy from their personnel file here, which I'm not going to read. So the information from Freeman indicates that Hoy was a poor employee, a liar, and a mental case. Next, the FBI went out to California to talk to the Southgate General Motors plant out there. And I'll just note one thing from his personnel records, or from the interview records out there. Apparently, he gave as a personal reference Senate candidate Louis B. Fine, Law Building, Norfolk, Virginia. So the mental case is giving a Senate candidate as a personal reference. On Wikipedia, I found this Louis B. Fine had been a candidate for Congress in 1962, and he lost that election. But he's a significant Republican politician in Norfolk, Virginia, and the mental case is using him as a personal reference. And it says this here: Mr. Reeves advised that a verification of Hoy's previous employment with General Motors in Dallas, Texas was requested on May 26, 1964, and the General Motors plant in Dallas informed that Hoy had been employed from June 4, 1963 to May 4, 1964 as a spot welder and had quit voluntarily and was not eligible for rehire. He had a very poor record. Mr. Reeves said Hoy would not be considered for employment at this plant and was not hired. When the FBI was trying to find Malcolm Hoy, they investigated in Norfolk, Virginia, and produced this document here. From this page, I'll just note that it says here that Mr. Hoy is blind and sells pencils in downtown Norfolk. Mr. Hoy here is Malcolm Hoy's father, and it also says that his family was on welfare. And on the second page of the document, it says, Mr. and Mrs. Hoy stated that in Dallas, Malcolm had met a young divorcee named Paulette, last name unknown, age 21, who worked in an unidentified dress factory in downtown Dallas. I'll note here that Abraham Zapruder operated a dress factory in downtown Dallas, but I have no way of knowing if Paulette worked there for Mr. Zapruder, but it's interesting. And this is the last page of the document, and I won't bother reading anything from that. And there's no indication in this document that the FBI ever talked to Louis B. Fine, the Republican politician that Malcolm Hoy used as a reference. The FBI did eventually find Malcolm Jerry Hoy in Whittier, California, and they produced this report when they interviewed him. And it says, on November 22nd, 1963, Hoy decided to drive downtown in Dallas, Texas to purchase a radio and also to watch the motorcade in which President John F. Kennedy was being driven. Hoy drove downtown sometime prior to 11 o'clock that morning in his 1960 four-door Star Chief Pontiac, metallic green color. He met no one en route and parked his car in a parking lot, which was in the vicinity of the Palace Theater in downtown Dallas. Hoy did not recall the name of the parking lot. Now note here that the story is already contradicting the story of Aubrey Lindsay, and the Lindsay report to the FBI is the only reason they're interviewing him, and yet the FBI does not confront him with these contradictions. Remember, Lindsay said that one of his employees gave him a ride downtown, whereas here the story now is that he drove himself in his own car, which according to Lindsay was in the shop that he owned. And the FBI makes no attempt to reconcile any of this. But anyway, continuing here, Hoy was dressed in dark-colored pants, a sport shirt, and black shoes, and that matches the photography that I've shown here already. He was carrying nothing in his hands, and he walked down Main Street to the Gordon Jewelry Store, where he purchased a radio on credit. The radio, which was approximately 12 inches long and 4 inches high, was placed in a paper bag, and the bag had no string or cord around it. I don't know why they say that. Apparently the FBI had some reason to think that it might have had a string or a cord around it. Now, if we look in the photography here, the photography from the Bell film shows that this person is carrying something. You can't see what it is. And since he went to purchase a radio, he says, and walkie-talkies were used by some of the conspirators in this event, this makes me think maybe he had a walkie-talkie, and maybe somehow he was, for some reason, communicating with other people with his walkie-talkie. But anyway, he doesn't say he had a walkie-talkie. After making the purchase, Hoy returned to the parking lot where he placed the radio in his car. He then walked down to where the motorcade would pass, and he could observe the president. He did not recall the names of the streets nor the directions involved, but he was standing on the corner of the intersection facing the oncoming motorcade, and the automobile in which the president rode turned left and proceeded down toward a tunnel. So, if he's telling the truth here, he's not the guy on the grass that I think he is. He would be standing somewhere on the north side of the intersection of Houston and Elm, either by the Texas School Book Depository or by the Daltex building. Hoy heard what sounded to him like exploding firecrackers, and he believed he heard approximately 4 reports which sounded close together. Hoy could just see the rear portion of the president's car and saw someone leap on the rear portion of the car. At that time, there seemed to be a lot of confusion and people running around. Hoy saw nothing that appeared to him to be unusual, and since the president's car had now passed out of his sight, he turned away and walked down toward a group of theaters. He believed that the movie theater to which he went was the Palace Theater, but he was not certain, as there were about 4 theaters very close together. Hoy recalled that the picture he went to see was Cleopatra. He did not recall the specific part of the movie that was showing when he entered the theater, but approximately 35 minutes after he entered the theater, he went to the lobby to get some candy. There he heard some people say that the president had been shot. It was at that time that he first realized what had occurred, and that the noise that he thought was exploding firecrackers might well have been shots. Hoy could not recall the specific number of shots that he had heard. Hoy went back to his seat, and a short time thereafter a man announced in front of the theater that the president had been shot. Many people in the theater left at that point, but others stayed, and Hoy stayed until he had seen the entire movie. On leaving the theater, Hoy bought a newspaper and thought that it was about 3 o'clock. He was not certain of the time. He returned to his car and drove back to his apartment. He talked to the apartment manager about the day's events and told the manager that he had heard a number of shots and saw the assassination. Actually, Hoy said he had not seen any more than he had related above, and he did not recall whether or not he specified the number of shots he had heard. So obviously, the FBI is thinking of the fact that Lindsay, the mechanic, said that the president had been shot twice. And so it's not like they don't know what the story from the mechanic is, but they don't apparently question Hoy in order to reconcile the differences. Hoy said he had no information pertaining to Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, or the assassination of President Kennedy, except what he had spoken of above. He said he had never met Oswald or Ruby personally, and had never had any contact with them in any regard. Hoy said that outside of his time spent in the U.S. Army, he had only on one occasion ever actually owned a gun. He said this gun to which he referred was an old single-shot 22 caliber break-open breech loading rifle, which had been given to him by his landlady's son in the early part of 1963. He was then residing at 2222 Harlandale, Dallas, Texas. Hoy bought some shells for the rifle and placed some pillows in his closet and a package of cigarettes on the pillows, after which he fired the rifle at the package of cigarettes. He said the bullets went through the pillows and into the woodwork and passed into another room where it chipped the porcelain off the bathtub. He said his landlady was greatly upset over his activity and called the police. Hoy said he had no reason for shooting the rifle in his room, except that it was something he felt like doing at the time, and had no motive for doing it. All right, so this confirms that Hoy is a mental case. Hoy said he was subsequently approached by the police at his employment, but he was never arrested for it and was merely interviewed by them. Hoy furnished the following background information concerning himself through observation and interview. He is weighed 180 pounds, he's 6 feet high, dark brown curly hair. All of this is consistent enough to be the person that was seen by Dolan. And there's some more information here I'm not going to read. And a note at the end of the document. In Hoy's interview, he remarked that he did observe the president's motorcade and had heard reports thought to be the explosion of firecrackers and saw an individual climb on the back of the president's car and speed away. However, he did not realize until sometime later, when he was in a movie theater and heard the announcement that the president had been shot, that he tied the activities together. Hoy had no information of pertinence to the investigation. So I think that Hoy is lying here. I think the FBI is helping him to lie. And I think that he actually is this person we can see running in the Bell film. I'm spending an awful lot of time on this clown, and I don't even know what he did. Well, we might as well get to how he ended up. He founded a Christian ministry, Hands of Love International, and according to his obituary, he retired after 32 years in the transportation department of General Motors. So, even though the FBI report the General Motors personnel as saying that he was a poor worker and not eligible for rehire, he somehow ended up spending 32 years working for General Motors. And it is from his obituary that I get a photograph of him. And when I compare this photograph to the tall tramp in Dealey Plaza, I think it's the same guy. Of course, there's a separation there of many years, decades. But to me, it looks like it's probably the same guy. Hoy, to me, seems to be a rather uncommon name, so I find it interesting that the FBI talked to another Hoy, a David Edwin Hoy, who apparently was a magician and some media personality in Indiana. And I have no reason other than the name to think that this Hoy is related to Malcolm Jerry Hoy. And the reason the FBI talked to David Hoy was that he had been a telephone contact of William D. Crowe. And William D. Crowe used the stage name Bill DeMar, and he was the act who was performing at the Carousel Club, owned by Jack Ruby, who thought that he had seen Oswald in the audience at the Carousel Club prior to the assassination. And so that's kind of a random thing. It sounds like it's pure coincidence that this guy had called a David Hoy. But that got me searching around for other Hoys, and I came up with this post from the Education Forum, where it says, one of the JFK conspirators named in the Torbit document is Patrick Hoy, identified with Henry Crown as owners of the controlling block in General Dynamics between 1960 and 1966. Also named as David Hoy, no detail given. That's the guy I was just talking about, David Hoy. In R.B. Cutler's April 3rd, 1977, handwritten note to Richard E. Sprague, he says Gary Shaw showed pictures of Frenchie around General Dynamics. Everybody said that's Jerry Hoy. Then there's the note, that is Raoul, the guy that paid Ray, and the lead tramp in Dealey Plaza. Now, this is all kind of confusing, and of course you can't solidly base anything on this, but Malcolm Jerry Hoy seems to be identified with Frenchie here. Frenchie is one of the three tramps. He's not the tramp that I identify as Malcolm Jerry Hoy. But this interests me because it's identifying one of the tramps as Jerry Hoy. And it says Frenchie, but it also says lead tramp here. And if you look at the photographs in Dealey Plaza of the three tramps, some of them have Frenchie as the lead tramp, and some of them have the tall tramp as the lead tramp. And the tall tramp is the one that I think is Malcolm Jerry Hoy. And so it seems to me possible that these people at General Dynamics were identifying Malcolm Jerry Hoy as the tall tramp. And this is the actual Gary Shaw note, or part of it, that was posted in the thread on the Education Forum. And so to me, it seems, because I've already identified one of the tramps as Malcolm Jerry Hoy, it seems to me that someone at General Dynamics is identifying one of the tramps as a Jerry Hoy. And so it makes me wonder whether Malcolm Jerry Hoy had something to do with General Dynamics. And, it just leaves me with questions. I don't usually spend a lot of time on people that I can't come to some firm conclusion about. My firm conclusion I have here is that Malcolm Jerry Hoy was involved in some way, but I don't know what he did. I think he was the tall tramp, and that he's the running man that we can see in the Bell film. And maybe I'd better just leave it at that. And then carrying on from the mental case with the Bell film, I'll stop on this frame because it shows all these people here. And down on the bottom there, we've got the babushka lady, who I think actually took what we call the Mormon photo. The top of Charles Brem's head, and Jean Hill's head, and Mary Mormon's head. And then we've got Bill and Gail Newman on the other side of the street, down on the ground, covering their children. I think they are conspiracy witnesses. I'm not going to get into that here, into the details of that. And then Bobby Hargis to the right of them. He's the motorcycle officer who had crossed the street, stood on a wall to look around, and we don't get to see exactly where he stands. But here he's coming back to his motorcycle, which he had left on the other side of the street. And we see Sitzman and Zapruder having got off the pedestal there. At this point, they're walking away from the pedestal. But as we shall see, Zapruder turns around and goes into the shelter, the pergola shelter. We'll get to that. And you can see Mr. Hester, a little bit of him over to the right. And then continuing with the film, we can see that Zapruder turns around and he starts walking back towards the shelter. And I have already pointed out Wiegman and Alan Tippett and his friend, so we'll move on. And I'll stop on this frame here just to point out Jack Franzen again. This is the man who had been standing with Joey Brem while Charles Brem was on Houston Street photographing for Alkins. Here he's about halfway between where he had been with Joey Brem and where Charles and Joey Brem end up sitting on the ground. So apparently he took Joey over to Charles, or maybe halfway to Charles, and Charles took Joey from there. We don't get to see that actual part of it. And I think we should note here that Jack Franzen is by himself. He's not with his own son, and he's not with his wife. And therefore, the FBI reports of interviews with him and with his wife can be assumed to be fabrications, showing that Franzen and the FBI both are involved with the assassination cover-up, at least. And in front of him, there's a guy down on the ground. I forget his name. I think he's been identified. He's the guy you can see running in the Zapruder film who falls down and whom A.J. Milliken thought might have been shot in the foot. Well, I went and looked this guy up, and his name, he's been identified as a Malcolm Summers. So apparently Malcolm Jerry Hoy, if I'm right, and Malcolm Summers were both standing in the same area. And if you notice, this guy looks like he might have white shoes or white sneakers. And he's a little over 30, I believe, at the time of the assassination. So this could be the guy that Dolan had seen and said was throwing a ball up in the air. But I want to drop this because I know I'm never going to be able to figure it out. So I'm dropping that now. And here we can see that Abraham Zapruder has entered the shelter. He's inside the shelter while Sitzman stands outside. And we can see here in this Rickerby photo, in this large blow-up credited to Bill Miller, "Good night, Mr. Miller," wherever you are. We can see that Zapruder is having a conference here. I think Mr. Hester has gone in there since by the time this photo was taken. Perhaps Sitzman has gone in there. They all know each other. And apparently they're having a conference in the Pergola shelter, even though Zapruder told the Warren Commission that he got down off the pedestal and went right back to his office. He left this out of his story. But I think it's important that they all went in there to have a chat, especially considering that there was a cameraman inside the shelter during the assassination, as can be seen in some versions of the Mormon photo, what we call the Mormon photo, which was actually taken by the Babushka lady. There seems to be a cameraman in there behind Zapruder taking photography, and this is part of what reveals the Zapruder film to be a compilation film, or a film that has more than one film source for its composition. And so I think it's very important that Zapruder went back in there to have a talk with the cameraman, presumably, and that he didn't mention to the Warren Commission that he went back into the shelter. And this motorcycle officer, on his motorcycle, going down the street, I have identified as J.W. Williams, though the shills and idiots will insist that this is H.B. McLean, but I say it's J.W. Williams. It is true, according to the Dallas Police Department documents, that H.B. McLean, not J.W. Williams, was assigned to be this motorcycle officer, and H.B. McLean himself, during the HSCA hearings, also claimed that he was this officer.
How do you know that's you?
Just the way that I'm sitting.
I wonder if you care to describe how you're sitting.
It just comes natural to you.
As only it should, I think.
And you don't identify any other mark on that last photograph as being
No,
yourself?
sir, I can't tell.
On the motorcycle.
So even though Representative Dodd here seems to be seriously pursuing this issue, nonetheless, unambiguously, it is the official story that H.B. McLean was this motorcycle officer. However, there's Officer Baker to consider. In this photograph, the motorcycle officer in question, is it McLean or is it Williams, is the one with the question mark next to it. And the other officer here is Officer Baker. Motorcycle officers in the motorcade would travel in pairs, one on one side, one on the other side, and these are the two who were paired together. That is, Officer Baker was paired with the motorcycle officer in question. And Baker testified to the Warren Commission, and Senator Cooper asked him, "Were there any other officers that you saw near the school book depository when you went in?" There was an officer working traffic on that corner, and Officer J.W. Williams was. And Alan Dulles interrupts him because he doesn't want him to talk about J.W. Williams. "By that corner, you mean the corner of Elm and Houston?" "That is right, sir. J.W. Williams, who was a motorcycle officer, was, I thought, over on the left-hand side of me, and he was right with me. But as I ran in this building, I found that I was by myself. I didn't know where anybody went." "Did you later see J.W. Williams, Officer Williams?" "Yes, sir. He stated that when the motorcade left with the president, and they immediately went Code 3 to Parkland, why, he was up there with him, and he went up there with him. And later I saw him out there at Parkland." Now, it may not be obvious to you what this means is, but I'll tell you what it means. Baker is saying that J.W. Williams is the motorcycle officer that was paired with him, the one that was riding on the other side of the street. And when he got to the Texas School Book Depository, he just assumed that the motorcycle officer he saw there running into the building was the guy that he had been riding beside. But then when he went to Parkland Hospital, he talked to Williams out there, and Williams told him that he didn't stop at the Texas School Book Depository. He just went on with the president to Parkland Hospital. So what we can take from this is that Baker is saying that Williams was his partner on the other side of the street, and that Williams did not stop at the Texas School Book Depository, even though originally Baker thought that he had. So Baker says that this guy riding beside him is J.W. Williams, not H.B. McLean. And I think Baker must have known who was riding beside him in the motorcade on the day that the president was murdered. In addition to that, we also have an FBI report of an interview with Garland Slack, a witness in Dealey Plaza, who the FBI reports as saying that Officer H.B. Randall picked up a frightened young colored boy who was hiding under a monument. If we look at the Dallas Police Department documents, we see that there is no Officer Randall on the entire force, and the only officer who has the first two initials H.B. is H.B. McLean. So I think Garland Slack saw H.B. McLean pick up the young frightened colored boy. He probably told the FBI that, and the FBI, who is in on this conspiracy, probably changed the name from McLean to Randall because they knew that they didn't want it to be known that McLean was in Dealey Plaza because he was there to do something. That is, he was there to do something for the conspiracy. This is from the Darnell film, and this motorcycle officer here can be seen in this film running towards the Texas School Book Depository. The shills and the idiots will say that this is Marion Baker. It can be proven that this is not Marion Baker. And the only other person it could be, I think, is H.B. McLean. So it seems to me that he's running here to do a job for the conspiracy. I think what he's doing is retrieving walkie-talkies that had been used in the Texas School Book Depository That is, the conspiracy was using Dallas police walkie-talkies to murder the president. That's what I'm saying, and I think this is McClane running in this film, and therefore he cannot be the officer that I've identified in the Bell film as J.W. Williams, because he's doing this while Williams is riding down the street. And if, as I say, Garland Slack saw McClane pick up a frightened young colored boy and bring him to the sheriff's department, which is what he said, or he said, well, the FBI says he said H.B. Randall, but as I explained, I think that's McClane. If that's true, then McClane was in Dealey Plaza for a substantial amount of time after the shooting, and he would still be in Dealey Plaza when this motorcycle officer is going down the street. So I identify the officer here in the Bell film as J.W. Williams. And here we have the Chisholms running down the street. Mr. Chisholm on the left, holding little Ricky Chisholm, and Mrs. Chisholm behind him, carrying the handbag which contains the short gun which had been used by J.D. Tippit on the grassy knoll to shoot JFK in the head. And now we come to this frame which shows Officer Haygood. He's just got off his motorcycle here, and he begins his run up the hill. Haygood goes up to the overpass, where he stands on thin air and sees a railroad detective who has a rifle with him that Haygood never mentioned in any of his accounts of his trip to the overpass. And over here to the right, we see sitting on the steps 2 of the 3 stepmen. And here I've brightened up the image a little bit just to emphasize the fact that only 2 of the 3 stepmen are there at this time. But when the president was shot, we know there were 3 of them there. And here in the much more film, we can see that one of these stepmen, the one to the right, starts to move up the steps as he sees that JFK has been shot. So he makes his move as if on cue when JFK is shot to go up the steps to go do something, I presume. And what I presume he's doing is that he goes up there to help the conspiracy people, whoever else is there, move J.D. Tippit's body from behind the Black Dogman wall, where he has just been shot, into the transfer ambulance, which is waiting for J.D. Tippit behind the pergola. I also surmise that this stepman had a job to do before and during the assassination. This picture I posted is a detail from the Willis 5 photograph. It shows in blue the location of the overpass storm drain shooter. This is not the railroad detective. This is somebody else. You can't see this person in this photo. And there is a version of the photo where you can see that there's something there. I think this photo has been altered, and that this comes from the version owned by the 6th Floor Museum, so I wouldn't expect it to show anything. But anyway, that's where I say the storm drain shooter was, the overpass storm drain shooter. And I've drawn a little red line from where I say he was to JFK's throat. So, and I think this was part of the plan, was to shoot JFK in the throat in order to produce a reaction in JFK, because before that he had been shot with a poison shot, and they wanted JFK to be reacting as if he had been shot by a bullet, not by a poison shot. And that would have a very different effect, I think. So they wanted the shot into the throat to make him respond to being shot by a bullet. And anyway, this shot comes from the overpass storm drain shooter right by the back of dark-complected man, and there's an insert on the left of dark-complected man after the assassination walking away, and you can see that he has something under his jacket that I take to be a bullet protection thing, something like a bulletproof vest, only it's not a vest, it's on his back. And I take it he's wearing that because he knew that shot would be coming from behind him, very close to his back, in order to hit JFK in the throat. And therefore I conclude that this is part of the plan, to fire a shot from the overpass storm drain into JFK's throat at a particular time, because they want to time this to immediately follow the poison shot. So I conclude, or I surmise, that Stepman's job at this time is to make sure nobody's standing in the way of that shot. And this Stepman happens to be the furthest one up the steps. So I think he's there to make sure the other two Stepmen don't get in the way of this shot, or anybody else who might come into the area. And here, as I believe I showed earlier, we can see the 11-year-old colored boy, presumably pointing to the window in which he saw a black man fire 2 more shots. Then we come to Jean Hill, the lady in red. And when Bell resumes filming, we see Jean Hill up at the top of those steps across the street. So Jean Hill crossed the street and went up the steps, and we see her. She's walking here. She's about to go behind the Black Dogman wall. And she told the Warren Commission, and I ran across through there and started up the hill. When I looked down on the ground, I mean, as I was running up the hill to catch that man, she had seen a man across the street whom she thought was suspicious. Maybe it was one of the stepmen running, but she did not describe him clothed as the stepman. Anyway, as I was running up the hill to catch that man, I looked down and saw some red stuff and thought, oh, they got him. He's bleeding. And this is embarrassing because it turned out to be Kool-Aid or some sort of red drink. Now, she's up behind the Black Dogman wall, which is where I say J.D. Tippit was shot and left his puddle of blood that we can see in a film that was taken after this. Now, later, she doesn't say how she knows it turned out to be something other than blood. She doesn't say she checked it herself. She doesn't say somebody told her that. She doesn't say she read it in the newspaper. But I think she really did see blood there. And she probably had told somebody, though I don't see it in any of the FBI reports. She probably had told somebody she saw blood there, and she wants to cover that now by saying it turned out to not be blood, is what I think. Anyway, I think she saw blood there because I think J.D. Tippit was shot there, and there was a puddle of blood there, and we have Jerry Coley saying that he found a puddle of blood there, and we see it in this film. So I think the Bell film shows her here just before she goes behind the Black Dogman wall and finds J.D. Tippit's puddle of blood. Going on and stopping the film here, there's another lady in red there. I think that's a different person. I don't think that's Jean Hill. I think she's got a shorter coat or whatever. Anyway, I stop it here because this person here is the dark-complected man. And in the Bell film, we can see that he's walking up the hill to the overpass after the assassination. Some shills and idiots have him walking in the opposite direction across that middle lawn area where these people are coming from. But the Bell film shows that this time at least, he's walking up the hill towards where I say the overpass shooter was. I don't know why he would be doing that. In this old graphic of mine I put together with 2 different photographs that were taken, I reckon, at about the same time, though you can't be absolutely sure of the timing. We have dark-complected man sitting on the side of the road just after the assassination, apparently talking on a walkie-talkie. That's what it looks like to me, and other people have noted that. And at the same time, or about the same time, the railroad detective on the overpass with a rifle has his rifle down in front of him and appears to be talking on a walkie-talkie too. So I theorize that dark-complected man is talking to the railroad detective at this time. And he's up the hill there where the dark-complected man is walking later on, a few minutes later. So it could be he's going up to talk to his friend on the overpass, the railroad detective. So this seems like a strange time to do that, just after the president had been shot. And there's a policeman right up there. But he's walking up in that direction. And then note here in this frame, the man circled in red on the left, he is running towards Officer Cheney, whom I identified earlier in this video, who I say was sitting under the overpass waiting for Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service agent in the passenger seat of the limousine, to hand out the gun that William Greer had used to shoot John Connally and the president, handing that gun out to Officer Cheney. Well, this man here, circled in red, is running towards Cheney, as we can see in the Bell film. Even though Bell is panning away from the action, we can see that this man is running straight towards Officer Cheney. And I presume he's running to Cheney in order to get that gun. And I'm able to identify this officer because James Tague told the Warren Commission that he talked to a police officer here, and L.L. Hill, a police officer, said that he talked to the witness, who has to be James Tague. So L.L. Hill was down here. L.L. Hill was not supposed to be in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination, according to the documents available. L.L. Hill was out in his district, District 22, answering calls. But actually, as we can tell on the Dallas Police radio recording, L.L. Hill was in Dealey Plaza. And in addition to that, we can see in the Dallas Police radio transcript that later in the day out in Oak Cliff, after J.D. Tippit has been taken to the hospital and pronounced dead, L.L. Hill gets on the radio and says that he gave Tippit's gun to Sergeant Owens. And so I conclude that William Greer used J.D. Tippit's gun to shoot the president, so that J.D. Tippit could be blamed, if anyone needed to be blamed, for having used a .38 in Dealey Plaza. They didn't have to do that, so J.D. Tippit was able to die a hero, according to the official story. But I think he was being held in reserve to be blamed, if necessary, for having been in Dealey Plaza and shooting the president. So William Greer used J.D. Tippit's gun during the assassination. He gave it to Roy Kellerman. Kellerman gave it to Officer Cheney. Officer Cheney gave it to L.L. Hill, and L.L. Hill gave it to Sergeant Owens. And Sergeant Owens turned it in as Tippit's property. So the Bell film shows us how Tippit's gun got from William Greer to Sergeant Owens. There's more to the gun story. It's not the gun that Tippit actually died with, but we'll get back to the Bell film here. And the next thing I recognize as interesting is this police officer here, who is, I think, wearing some kind of a raincoat, but if it weren't for the hat, you wouldn't know it was a police officer. He's walking with a woman here. I don't have anything I can say about her, except that I see he's with her. And I presume it's the same officer we see here walking very close in front of the camera. And I find this frame to be significant because it shows his hat. He wears a white hat, which is what the traffic division wears, and also higher level personnel wear a white hat, like Chief Curry. When he wears a hat, he wears one of these. But there's something different about this hat from all of the other white hats we can see in the photography. And in this graphic, I have that officer there in the lower left-hand corner, and I also have examples of white hats from other photography regarding the assassination. And every single one of the other officers in the photography has this extra band, metallic-looking sort of band, perhaps. Or maybe it's plastic, I don't know. But their hats all have this extra wider band added to the hat. Every single one of them. The only officer in all of the photography who doesn't have that is this one in the Bell film. And this makes me suspicious that this police officer is not actually a police officer, and that the hat is just a prop, and he's dressed as a police officer because he's involved in the assassination action. That is, that he played a role, and he's not really a cop. Maybe he's a CIA agent or an FBI agent or something. I don't know. But anyway, in the background, we can see the Black Dog Man wall and the pergola. So I think maybe he's walking away from that scene. And as this film shows, there's a station wagon here behind the pergola, in which I think J.D. Tippett's body has been placed. And over on the other side of the station wagon, you can see the white hat of a police officer. So I am suspicious that this police officer we can see in the Bell film is leaving the scene after J.D. Tippett's body has been taken away by that station wagon, which I presume to be the transfer ambulance referred to in the radio traffic. I think he was probably guarding this car while Tippett's body was in it, so that no curious onlookers would approach the car and see J.D. Tippett in it. So I think maybe that's who this is that we see in the Bell film walking away. And that's it. This very long video has come to an end finally. Thank you for watching.